I've also learned over the years that organization structures tend to follow people and they're not as rigid as, you would think when you come into an organization, look at an org chart. But in my experiences, as you're developing the team, as you're gaining and picking up more responsibilities, we've been very fluid in having the org chart kind of be able to shift and maneuver around to set up it in a way that allows the right people to be managing the right tasks, as successfully as we possibly can be.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically, Josh. How are you?
I am doing great. Question for you.
Yes.
Have you ever been in New York City?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Big Apple. All
The
right.
Big Apple.
Have you ever driven in New York City?
Yes. Yes, I have. It's been a while, but yes, I have.
Yeah. What was it like?
Not fun. I do remember. So one of the times that I drove, it was driving through New York, and I actually got lost
Oh,
in a not so great part of town. And I was actually traveling from New Hampshire to Florida. I was moving down to Florida to go to school, drove through New York City, got lost with a caravan full of furniture and stuff and things tied to the roof and whatnot. So I was kind of an easy target. Luckily, nothing happened. I was able to get back on the right freeway, and this is before GPS, so I've got my paper maps out and trying to figure out where to go. But yeah, that was one of my experiences in New York.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow. I'd like to unpack that sometime.
I had to unpack the van. How about you?
That's true. Yeah. I recently drove in New York for the first time after I don't know how many dozens of times. I've probably been there at least 20 times or so, and rented a car and drove in the city for the first time. And I had the pleasure of sitting on the George Washington Bridge during morning rush hour traffic, which was fantastic. Couldn't say enough great things about it.
1010 would recommend.
Yes, or the opposite. But part of that drive, actually all of that drive over the course of 2 days, I ended up, by happenstance, in all five boroughs. I started at Newark, ended at Newark, and I went through Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, and Brooklyn. And part of that drive was driving from the Bronx Zoo down to Coney Island, where the New York Aquarium is. So I got to experience going from one Wildlife Conservation Society property to another in one day, which leads us to today's guest.
Why does that lead to today's guest? Is he involved
Because
with WCS?
he is Niko Radjenovic, is the Vice President of Business Services for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which oversees 4 zoos and 1 aquarium, all in New York City.
And what's great is we got to hear about the Bronx Zoo specifically, but WCS in general being a pioneer in conservation. Obviously, a lot of folks talk about conservation now. They were focused on this years and years and years ago. So we really got to hear about the evolution of their version of conservation.
Yes, he also talks about his nimble leadership, and we get to hear, he's been with WCS for almost 35 years. We got to hear a lot about his leadership style, his leadership strategy, and the way that he manages people and manages goals as well.
And speaking of goals, cascading goals is one of the things that came up a couple times, just in terms of how everybody's role, everybody's goals need to align so that ultimately we can all achieve the things that we're trying to achieve.
So with that said, should we get in a helicopter this time and go visit 4 zoos and 1 aquarium all in one day?
Let's do it. Hey, Niko, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good morning, Matt and Josh, and it's good to be with you both today.
It's wonderful to have you here. Great to see you again. Let's start off at the beginning. Well, maybe not the total beginning, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your career and what it is that you're doing now.
Cool. So I'm currently the Vice President of Business Services for the Wildlife Conservation Society. In my current role in business services, I'm responsible for attendance-driven revenue, but as well as driving visitation to the five New York City parks that WCS manages, the Bronx Zoo, the New York Aquarium, the Central Park, Prospect Park, and Queens zoos. Yeah, it's been great. I've been with WCS. I'm going to explain a little bit about myself, I guess, at this time. I've been with WCS almost 35 years. Started here when I was a kid. Local Bronx, New York resident, visited the zoo quite often. I took full advantage of the Bronx Zoo's free days as a youngster. And ended up getting a summer job, first job ever when I was 15 years old, recruited out of a local high school, and honestly never left. It's kind of, maybe not as unique, but somewhat unique in that I've had worked for one employer my entire career. When I was 19, promoted into management. At the time, I was in college going for an engineering degree and ended up taking the opportunity to, become a manager at the Bronx Zoo, switched educational studies and kind of went into business and worked my way up through management, manager, senior manager, assistant director, until my current role is a VP of Business Services.
Niko, you said you were promoted to manager at 19. I'm curious what that was like of being in that leadership role at that very young age. Do you recall kind of challenges and struggles of being able to get buy-in from your team while you were still kind of a kid yourself at that age
Yeah.
in a management role?
Yeah, no. So the folks I worked with, I really didn't have, it wasn't too challenging because they knew me and I worked with them for many years. But they were definitely, I can think back and I remember taking over at the time. I kind of grew up in restaurants at the Bronx Zoo at WCS. And I remember taking over a restaurant and I had some very tenured kitchen staff, unit managers, union kitchen staff, union folks kind of running the place. And, here's a 19-year-old telling, somebody that's been here 30, 35 years, what to do. And it kind of happened overnight. Whereas one day, I was going in, grabbing lunch. And then the second day I was in charge of the location and it was very challenging. And my approach was not an autocratic one, which is, I'm the boss, you have to listen. It was more of, I'm going to earn your respect. It's going to maybe take me another couple of weeks to do so, but I'm going to show that, the organization made the right decision by promoting me via the knowledge, via the experience, via the, good leadership practices. And I want to say I won over 99% of the team. There's always a straggler here and there that you have to, or search yourself a little more. But it was definitely challenging those first couple of years to, be subordinate to many folks. And then all of a sudden, overnight you're their manager yeah, but it worked out well. It worked out very well.
Well, Niko, I'd like to stay with that just for a second because it is a really difficult transition, to kind of go from, hey, we're working together, now I'm your boss, or even just moving into someplace brand new and kind of taking over. So when you say that you took the time to earn their respect, I'm curious if we can dive a little deeper into what did you do to earn their respect? And I would imagine it's things that you're still doing now as a leader that help you earn respect with your current team.
Yeah, I think it starts with being practical, being fair, clearly understanding what the goals are, communicating what the goals are, and helping the team achieve success. Because in order for myself to be successful, they have to be successful in doing their jobs. And so I think part of it is just being transparent, communicating very, very, very well, being even-handed, being consistent, and looking at all successes, helping to drive successes, but then looking at all successes as team successes, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. Again, reiterating, when the team is successful individually, the people are successful, the team's successful, I'm successful. And it was instilling the notion of team, that we are a high performance team and we're gonna do this together. And my job is to set goals, set priorities, ultimately give the tools and resources they need to do their jobs. And then I stand back. I try not to micromanage. I let them do their jobs. Sometimes you need to step in and make some, corrections here and there. But overall, very team focused, very focused on recognizing talent, rewarding talent, moving people up through the ranks. I want to say something that I've been very good at and that's served me well is I take every opportunity I can when I have either a vacancy or somebody leaving, or if I have a performance issue where I try to, manage somebody up in the organization, but sometimes you unfortunately have to manage them out of the organization. I try to take these opportunities to shuffle folks around, to create excitement, to, whereas one vacancy could lead to 2 or 3 promotions, and it's recognizing performance from the team that has really been invaluable to me over the years, and has created a lot of excitement for the team, because it becomes good for them. It becomes a bit of an excitement, an exciting time. Everybody loves doing more and earning more. And so, that's been a big part of it.
So, Niko, you mentioned briefly the 5 properties under the Wildlife Conservation Society, and I'm wondering for those who might not be familiar, if you're able to expand on it a little bit on just really all these properties, all within New York City, but kind of the individual nuances amongst them as well.
Absolutely. So, the Wildlife Conservation Society saves wildlife and wild places worldwide through science, conservation action, education, and inspiring people to value nature. That, in essence, is our mission. It does this via 2 paths. One is the 4 zoos and the aquarium, whose role it is to inspire the nearly 4 million annual visitors to understand, care for, and advocate for nature. The flagship park, the Bronx Zoo, which we celebrated our 125th anniversary a couple of years ago, opened in 1899 and is one of the world's largest metropolitan zoos, spanning 265 acres of New York City parkland, and has over 11,000 animals. The Bronx Zoo, kind of a couple of things that make us unique. Well, one of the things that kind of comes to mind first is that we were a pioneer in conservation. Now it's one of those buzzwords, but 100 plus years ago, not so much. And we're widely credited with helping to save the American bison. We bred bison over 125 years ago at the Bronx Zoo, and we've shipped them out west. I think originally to the Wichita Mountain Refuge in Oklahoma, and I know we sent some to Oklahoma as late as a couple of years ago. So we're still doing what we started doing over 1.25 centuries ago. We're also known for having pioneering naturalistic cageless habitats and exhibits. We just took a guest through the park. I took a guest through the park yesterday, and was in some of these exhibits, Jungle World, Congo, that are 30, 40 years old, and they're fantastic exhibits now. I could only imagine kind of what our visitors and other professionals kind of thought of them 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it is pretty cool. So that's the flagship. The New York Aquarium is another key property for us. It is known for being the oldest continually operated aquarium in the U.S., originally opening in Battery Park, Manhattan in 1896, and then, moving to Coney Island, Brooklyn, where it is currently in 1957. In addition to those 2 larger kind of flagships, we have the 3 city zoos, the Central Park Zoo, the Queens Zoo, the Prospect Park Zoo. Unique in that we own and operate the Bronx and Aquarium, but we manage the 3 smaller city zoos for the Parks Department of New York City. So we're managing them on a management contract for New York City, and we've been doing that for some time now and expect that we will into the future. So having 5 parks makes us really unique and almost 4 million visitors. The second path WCS is known for is our global conservation program, which is the world's largest and longest running field conservation program that works to save wildlife and wild places throughout the world. It oftentimes or most times works with indigenous people, local communities, local governments, and other NGOs to do that work. So it's really these two fronts that are interconnected that makes us stand out from other zoos around the world. We have over 4,000 staff that work for the society, and more than half of those are based globally as part of the in the conservation program. And I want to say the vast majority of those are native residents in the countries where we operate in, and so it's unique, really an incredible organization. I deal more clearly with the five parks, with the zoos and the aquarium, but the global part is something that you can't miss when you get to our parks. We talk about it all the time. When you're at an exhibit and looking at an animal, we're talking about the conservation work we're doing worldwide, and I don't think anybody else can connect the two as well as we can.
And there really does need to be that connection, in order for people to eventually take some action, right? If they're going to do something that is going to help conservation, then, yes, going to the zoo and seeing the wonderful animals is a start, but then I'm guessing you're also you're also trying to inspire some action with them as well. So thinking about that, like, what is that end goal for the visitor?
Yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely. Inspiring conservation action is one of our clear goals. We look at a visit to one of our parks as the first step of an act of conservation. And ultimately the goal is to have people come into the parks. Education programs are not only do you see and learn about the conservation work we're doing, but you learn about why it's important to conserve our native lands and our animals. And we ultimately want folks to be able to make smart decisions on their own. But we also want it to lead to, good conservation stories down the road. And so by coming in and getting an appreciation for wildlife and wild animals, it's the start of that, and it fosters a love. And I'm an example of that. As a kid, I would come into the Bronx Zoo on a regular basis and, was proud to get employed by and still am employed by an organization with such a great mission. You kind of feel good when you hit your numbers and you're contributing to the organization's goals, and you're not just lining somebody's pockets, you're actually out there doing good in the world. So it's really a good feeling to this day.
Yeah. You mentioned that the Bronx Zoo was a pioneer in conservation, and I think I'm still stuck on the zoo opening in 1899 and the historic nature of that property. And I'm so curious as far as what the zoo experience was like back then, but even what the standard was like back then. And I'm curious if you're able to kind of shed a light on sort of the Bronx Zoo's initiative of being a pioneer for conservation, as well as, WCS as a whole, of course, and how that has kind of compared to maybe, over the last almost 35 years of public perception in zoos, and connecting that with the conservation message on the importance of communicating that, of saying, yes, this is an attraction, it's an entertainment destination, but really pushing the conservation message to the forefront, but also very much doing that at a time. And I'm thinking back to when that wasn't a forefront message.
Yeah. I think one of the ways that comes across is we have a Animal Planet docuseries called The Zoo, and I think there's a couple of them now with different ones, but we did that a few years ago, I think for 5 or 6 seasons. And I think that did a really good job to show the incredible amount of care that we take with our collection, with our animals. And honestly, every decision we make, you would think that, because at the end of the day, we are a business, we're in the business of conservation, the business of having zoos and an aquarium, you would think that takes priority. It doesn't. It's the animals, it's the collection. Everything we do is for the betterment of the collection, of the betterment of the animals. And I think that came across really loud and clear in that docuseries. And, there's been a lot of positives from that, that, I can point to, and I'll skip over some of that, but, ultimately, the majority of our visitors love animals, and when they see the great care that we take in caring for them, the naturalistic environment exhibits, it just it works well to foster added love for animals and conservation in general. And yeah, and it's done really well for us. And the mindset has changed over the last few years a little bit. We're starting to see it here and there. But I feel strongly that zoos have a place in modern society and showcasing collections and education, not only the conservation work we do, but the education programs that we have in making sure we're based in one of the largest urban centers in the world, making sure people have access to green spaces, to seeing these collections, to getting a love for these animals, for wanting to conserve and save them, and that's clearly that's one of the goals of the organization and of our zoos and aquarium.
And so, Niko, can you talk a little bit about, I know you said that the habitats were great even 30 and 40 years ago, to today's standards, but how has the guest experience maybe evolved at a zoo and an aquarium where obviously, you just talked about some of those attitudes have changed a little bit, and the docuseries did a great job of kind of telling your story, but where do you see that kind of that guest experience evolving over the years?
Yes, so I think every park, every zoo and aquarium, and I think every park in general is focusing more and more on customer service, on visitor satisfaction. Call it the Disney mindset is kind of spread through amusement parks, through zoos, through aquariums. And so I've definitely seen that with our properties, but in other properties as well, which is a really good thing to focus on the visitor and making sure satisfaction is at, record levels at all-time highs. I've also noticed that a lot of, zoos, not as much maybe our parks, but a lot of zoos and aquariums out there are evolving and introducing more experiences. It's not just animals anymore in many locations. There's rides, there's theaters, there's shows. They're turning more amusement-y than they ever have been. Which is not a bad thing. Ultimately, whatever's engaging for visitors and keeps them in the park longer and kind of adds to the overall satisfaction is a positive. We've done a little bit of that. We've introduced, a zip line, an aerial climb course, a couple of 4D theaters, a few things here and there. Not, nowhere near. Definitely wouldn't consider us, to have skewed too much towards the amusement parks. But that's something that we have seen that seems to be a prevailing trend.
Mm. And then what about being able to, you mentioned kind of the zip line, but kind of maybe some of those ancillary experiences, whether it is within your properties or even just, externally as well, of making sure that connects back to the mission in and of itself and kind of ties directly back, even if it is the justification of, hey, this will help us generate additional revenue, which then helps to kind of fund all of these, this is a fundraising initiative in and of itself in certain ways. But
Yeah.
being able to kind of connect those experiences that may or may not directly be animal focused, but also making it very relevant too.
We take not only great pride, but we spend a lot of time and energy to make sure everything we do is on brand. On brand. If it's happening at the Bronx Zoo, it's on brand with the Bronx Zoo, which ultimately means involving conservation, involving our animal collections. An example I'll use is a few years ago we ended up doing Dino Safari, where we brought in animatronic dinosaurs, and how does that connect? And we spent a lot of time to make sure that we taught folks of how, in essence, dinosaurs are modern day birds and that evolution and what animals can connect to what dinosaurs. And so there was a heavy educational focus on that. Not only was it really cool and fun and, extremely popular and extremely high penetration rates and did well for us. And we've done it several times since then. So we try to do it every 3 or 4 years, but we definitely connected it back to the mission to, these animals are extinct and there's so much more you can do as visitors to the park to make sure that we are taking care of, the natural habitats and the animals throughout the world currently, but also connecting the dots to how, animals within our collection have evolved and kind of taken them back to, use an example of dinosaurs. And so we really try to stay on brand and connect everything we do back to, who we are, which is a conservation organization that has, zoos and an aquarium and is in the business of conserving animals and taking care of animals in its collection.
So, Nico, in anticipation of this conversation, I did reach out to one of your colleagues, Randy, to ask what she would ask you in this format. And she said one of the things she really appreciates about your leadership is how well you navigate change. And there's been a lot of change, obviously, in every organization. And she was really wondering, like, as part of the conversation, can we talk a little bit about how you have been able to embrace change and manage it through, the different roles that you've been in, and also over the course of time that you've been at the zoo, which is, almost 30 years. So I'm wondering if you can kind of dive into that for us.
Sure. One of our values, so the organization has had values for many years now, and we kind of shifted to the organization-wide values. But, once upon a time, 10, 15 years ago, we had a separate set of values within my group, business services, and one of them was embrace change. And that's just something, if you're in the business world and dealing with visitors and ultimately responsible for revenue, change is something that inevitably will happen. And if you don't adapt to it, you're going to be left behind. So foremost, I'll start by saying I always assume I'm going to be able to figure it out and be successful with almost any opportunity. And, you have to be confident in yourself and in your team's abilities. And so I'll kind of start there. I always start with needing to clearly understand what the goals are. Goals of the new project, the new department, the new assignment that I'm kind of the opportunity dangling in front of you. And, I personally have always had a need to clearly be able to understand what success looks like. So what are the goals? Make sure you understand it. Understand what success looks like. Oftentimes you're gaining new staff or new teams, or you're in the process of hiring new staffs and teams to be able to accomplish the assignment or the addition. In my case, it's mostly been taking on other responsibilities in the organization, other departments, and kind of picking up some staff along the way. And so it's been critical to me to understand your team's strengths, their weaknesses. And I've had a knack for aligning my leaders' strengths, understanding what the goals are, understanding who's going to be able to move something forward. I can't speak enough to how important it is to create some excitement where, you're moving people around. There's new opportunities for people to do more. I've been able to align my leaders with those projects, those goals, and, clearly, setting priorities that they're going to be able to tackle and manage well. Again, creating some excitement around that. I've also learned over the years that organization structures tend to follow people, and they're not as rigid as, you would think when you come into an organization, look at an org chart. But in my experiences, as you're developing the team, as you're gaining and picking up more responsibilities, we've been very fluid in having the org chart kind of be able to shift and maneuver around to set up it in a way that allows the right people to be managing the right tasks, as successfully as we possibly can be. And so, we've been able to shape and reshape the business unit's org chart based on that. And, important to keep an eye on clearly the tools and resources at your disposal. But between tools and resources, we've been able to be successful in tackling it. And, I love to say that it's a science. It's not. It's just, it's just looking at stuff pragmatically and having, we can attitude and just being smart about how you approach the stuff. And I can't say enough about how important it is to surround yourself with the best possible people you can. Ultimately, when the team is doing their job, I'm doing my job, and ultimately the organization is benefiting from our business unit doing their job and doing it well. And so I guess I'll refer to that as cascading goals are also critical in taking on new responsibilities and ultimately delivering for your organization.
This question is kind of along a similar wavelength here, but it kind of has to do with managing standards and managing people and managing leaders across multiple properties and across the city. I drove a couple weeks ago from the Bronx Zoo down to Coney Island by the aquarium and was kind of on the edge of New York rush hour. So it's not they're not super easy to get to on a whim, but curious as far as really being able to get manage multiple people across multiple properties under the same organization.
Yeah, so the way we're set up now, and it really works well for us, is I have business leaders that are based out of the largest properties, primarily the flagship, which is the Bronx Zoo, and they manage all components of that function. So our director or head of admissions is managing admissions for all five parks. Out of the Bronx, he's making sure to get to the parks on a regular basis, and then he has managers at each of those parks. It just lends to a consistency and not only the learning, but the implementation of best practices across every single location. And, I remember a time when I would get to the various parks, and this example is in restaurants and merchandise. And, there was something I really saw that was unique and really cool. And one of the smaller properties that we weren't doing everywhere, and we implemented kind of a manager, almost an exchange program where we sent managers to run other operations for a couple of weeks a year just to be able to, get best practices and to make sure that everybody was learning from what one person was discovering as a best practice at their location. So, we've been very successful in having somebody do that function across all parks, but making sure you have sufficient staff at those parks to be able to, be the senior leader of food, merchandise, admissions, membership of whatever department it is you're managing. Can also, I have to highlight that, and there's a saying I learned from a supervisor many years ago: inspect what you expect. You have to make sure you're getting out there and, witnessing and seeing and making sure that it's happening the way it's supposed to be happening, and making sure that, everybody is, doing their jobs. And, you can make it a really positive thing. You're not out there with white glove inspections, but you're out there just making the, team feel good about the work that they're doing, making sure you're motivating them, etc. But in doing so, you're also making sure it happens. I also am guilty. My two kids can speak to this, that, the visiting one of our parks has become like a family pastime for many, many years. My kids are somewhat aging out of it now because I've been doing it for so long. But, coming in as a visitor and taking in the park as a visitor has been real important to me, usually on a weekend or a holiday or something along those lines, because, nobody really knows you're there and you're taking it in and getting the experience as a visitor would. And you're often able to see things that you do not, even when you're at one of the locations, one of the departments, for the purpose of doing a walkthrough. When you're a visitor and people aren't paying attention to you, specifically you, they're paying attention to 10,000 of you or 15,000 of you, it's been really helpful. So I think those are some of the ways we've been able to manage across the five parks, where we're in four of the five boroughs, in terms of miles, maybe not, too far, but in terms of, how long it takes to get there, it's an hour at least between the Bronx Zoo and the aquarium. And so it could be challenging.
So Niko, I love what you said about, inspecting what you expect, and then also kind of being out in the park and, enjoying it from a visitor's perspective. I'm also curious, thinking about how long you've been there. Granted, there have been changes, over the years, but it can also be very familiar. And I'm curious how you keep a fresh eye looking at things when you have seen it for 30 years.
Yeah. I've been lucky in the majority of my career. I've been able to take on new responsibilities, whether it's a promotion or not, usually every 3 to 4 years. So it's kind of kept things fresh. And I've been in this role now for 8 years, probably the longest I've been in any role in my career with WCS. And so that's kept it fresh. And what's been exciting for me is I feel and I act as an entrepreneur. And I know that's crazy to say, but I look at this is my business. And if it was my business, what would I do? I've been able to, the organization's been great in allowing our business unit to take risks, to make decisions, to be very nimble. You have to be, we could be bureaucratic at times, at 30,000 feet across the entire organization, but not a whole lot of that in my group, my team. We've been able to make changes, do little reorgs often, and just keep things fresh. And it's what's kept it exciting for me. We also have, I think it's about 14 departments in my group. And so your focus tends to vary depending on where the opportunity is, depending on where, really honestly the greatest opportunity to be able to deliver upon your goals. And sometimes, a few years ago it was food service and merchandise, and then it went to admissions and dynamic pricing, and then it went to membership, and lately it's been about marketing and promoting the locations. And so the focus shifts. You're still worried about everything and you're focused on everything, but you kind of tend to put 2 feet in different sandboxes. I have been able to put 2 feet in different sandboxes throughout my time at WCS, which has kept it fresh. And, they say time flies, particularly when you're looking at 35 years and 31 years full time, 4 years as a seasonal employee, but still 35 years with WCS, primarily out of the Bronx Zoo. It doesn't feel like it. I'll tell you that. And I think the combination of having such a diverse business unit, as well as being able to be nimble and make decisions and make changes. And, if I really feel like I need a resource, I ask for it, and 9 times out of 10, I get it. And it allows me to test something. If you're not, you don't want to fail often, you don't want to make mistakes often, but you have to take risks and you have to try new stuff. And, if you can't think back and think of something that didn't work, you're not being aggressive enough. So we've had our share of, well, that didn't work, but if you're right 7, 8 times out of 10, you're doing well.
Love to expand a little on this thinking like an entrepreneur mindset that you brought up, and wonder if you're able to help kind of unpack that and really sort of maybe what goes into a lot of that mindset, and thinking how those who might be listening to this could also think like an entrepreneur, even if they're in an organization that's more than 125 years old.
Yeah, trying to think of a good example, and kind of one just came to me. But the example I'll give, and I don't know, hopefully not controversial, is we had some pressure years ago to look at outsourcing food and merchandise. Specifically, I want to say more food than anything else. And it was important to me to kind of understand what the driver was, what the goal was, and look at what we were doing relative to what things would look like if we were to outsource. And we kind of ran the numbers. And I ended up giving our senior leadership, the CEO, the COO, at the time, the park director of the Bronx Zoo, options where this is what it looks like if we continue to run it. This is what it looks like if we were to outsource. There was a slight advantage to outsourcing, but then I had a third. And the slight advantage to outsourcing at the time was there was a capital investment that was being made in year one, within the first couple of years. And I looked at it as I would as an entrepreneur, saying, well, if that's really the advantage, what if we made that investment? How would things look then? And so I looked at it and said, okay, there's a scenario one, which is we do nothing different. Nothing changes. Scenario two is we outsource. Scenario three is we continue to run it ourselves, but allow me the opportunity to spend some money in the group, which will deliver even more. And, we ended up investing almost $5 million at one of our properties, the Bronx Zoo, and primarily in food service. And, the gains on that investment, I think the payback was within a couple of years. It was just tremendous. And I was also able to look at, maybe what we didn't do in industry best practice wise the best, and go and find people that I felt could bring that to us. And I ended up hiring, somebody that had a ton of experience. He happened to work for one of these companies that ran a large region of the country. food service in a large region of the country, many zoos and aquariums, was able to recruit and bring them on board. And in my opinion, implement all of the pros, be able to lift revenue, be able to have more net, but still maintain complete control and keep that within the business unit. And I would say that my ability at the time to kind of step back and say, if this was mine, how would I approach this? How would I look at this? What's really the best way to do it? It's not just as simple as an A and a B. There's other options, other things that we can do. That's the example that came top of mind. Again, might be a controversial one, but did work very, very well for us. And we try to do that. I try to do that. My team tries to do that with everything we do. I can't credit the organization enough because we've developed a really good track record for making investments and seeing returns and making smart decisions and seeing returns where there's not a whole lot that we wanted to do or have asked for. And that's been compelling that we haven't been given the runway to do. So, in some places might be a lot more difficult because you just don't have the bandwidth, the runway. Oftentimes it's monetary. Oftentimes it requires investments to be able to do that. And, when we say we're going to recoup the money in a couple of years, we have, or 2 or 3 years or 4 years, we have a really good track record of that. And so we've been able to, get the resources. And that's really what's allowed us to, be nimble, word I used previously, but also be someone like an entrepreneur, where you're looking for funding or investment, which clearly, and when you're in stages of growth and development, most entrepreneurs end up having to do. We've been able to do it internally.
Well, and one word, Niko, that I kind of tagged on to when you were talking about that was the word compelling, right? Because you said we're going to make a compelling case to make this improvement, and here's the ROI, and we've got a good track record and that type of thing. And I think if there's anything that I've seen even in my career or other organizations is the story isn't compelling enough, right? Or there isn't enough to say this is exactly what we're going to do. There may be some hiccups along the way, but this is how we're going to proceed. But I think that also goes back to something you said earlier, where you want to have a very clear idea of what that new project is going to be. You want to know what success looks like. And
Yeah.
I'm just kind of taking all that in and thinking about, how that then translates also to your team and how you lead the team and inspire that same kind of thought process in them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it starts from really clearly understanding the goals and what success looks like. You're not gonna, you don't want to, you're not gonna, I don't think I have, and maybe I have, and maybe it was a couple of things that I didn't get that I wanted, but the majority of the time I do. You're not going to pitch something to your organization that is not delivering on one or more of its goals. It's real important. I can't say that enough to really clearly understand what senior leadership wants, what the goals are, and your role in delivering those goals. We spend a lot of time goal setting with our team. We always make sure they're cascading, that everybody's goals end up supporting their manager's goals, support the department goals, support my goals as the business unit head. And then ultimately my business unit's goals support the organization goals, support my supervisor's goals or chief operating officer. And I think if you're set up properly and really understand, what that looks like, when you go to somebody and say you're going to be able to help them deliver on their goals, but they need to help you to give you resources and more tools, tools and resources that you need in order to do that. To me, that's compelling. And, that's something that, we've been able to do and been able to do it well. I look back to one thing I talked about food. I'll talk about admissions. And this is probably one of the things we can hang our hat on in business services that we probably did extremely well. And, I would say industry leading is, historically the Bronx Zoo's always had one admission ticket. It was called general admission ticket. And 15 years ago, before my time running admissions, somebody had an idea, well, you're nickel and diming, you can buy general admission, but then you have 6 or 7 of these attractions that are added charges when you're in the park. So why don't you go to to look to go to one ticket, and it was called pay one price pop ticket, where you buy that. So we had a general admission and we had a pay one price ticket that was a more premium ticket. I didn't say this, but the city, New York City, controls our pricing. They control our general admission pricing. So we can't eliminate that ticket. We can't take a drastic price increase. And we were looking at how do we have a product that makes the visitor experience better, but also generate more revenue. And when it started after a few years, I think the penetration of that pop ticket was about 25%, which wasn't bad. It was almost double the price of general admission. And when I remember taking over admissions and going there with the director of admissions and my boss, my supervisor at the time, and looking at I'll call it a menu board, but looking at the signage, the point of sale signage at the admissions gate, the visitor see, and we had memberships and we had this ticket and that ticket. And I asked, like, what do we want to sell? And I remember the time the vice president took a couple of minutes to say memberships. Well, no, maybe not. And what I was told is we wanted to sell the pay one price ticket. And over the years, as long as you understand what the goal is and what success looks like, we've developed so many strategies, changing the name, evolving the product, where currently 96% of all of our ticket buyers are buying the premium ticket. We've been able to evolve that product, generate tens of millions of dollars for the organization, but evolve that product into something that's been so successful. And we felt all along the way and still feel today that it's the best product for our visitor to have the best experience, which, it needs to be able to provide value but a lot of it is how you promote it, how you market it, how you sell it. I inherited a very transactional culture, particularly in admissions, but I'll say in all of my business units, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, depending on the department, where this is what we sold, what do you want, kind of a thing. The visitor tells you what they want, you register it, and you move on. Where we're doing selling and we have strategies like assume the sale strategies, and we have various things that we're doing now that just change the culture from one that was transactional to one which is really the backbone is a sales culture, and that's an example of how that admissions team really embraced that process, that goal. I had to do a lot of work the first couple of years, but honestly, since then it's been all them. The success that we've had over the last 10, 12 years was all that admissions team. They just needed to, have somebody really make it clear how they're going to be successful, and then to give them the tools and the leadership that was needed in order to allow them to do their jobs. And so that's another example that comes to mind. I like to give examples because I think there's probably people that are going to listen to this that can relate to the examples and not just the words. So.
Yeah, we appreciate the examples. It gives a lot of context to it, and we really appreciate it. And we're coming close to our end of our time here together. I feel like we blinked and this flew by. But Niko, if people want to learn more about the Wildlife Conservation Society, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Yeah, so I would, for WCS, for any of our parks, go to WCS.org or go to, BronxZoo.com or, the other parks, NYAquarium.com, etc. If you want to get in touch with me, I would say, email is probably a really good way. I'm not heavily, this is going to sound really bad for somebody that is responsible for marketing, but I'm not a heavy social media, LinkedIn guy. If I get it, a ping, I will respond to it, but nradjenovic at WCS.org. You can, look me up. I'm sure it's online. I expect there's going to be, you can put the email with this podcast. By all means, feel free to reach out. It's been a great run. One of the things I also can't say or can't speak to enough is you got to be connected with the industry and industry best practices. And I think you guys provide a forum for people to do that. So that's really invaluable to us all. So hopefully this was a little bit helpful. It's great, and love what I do. And I've done it for my career and my entire career, and really have no plans to stop doing it, for the foreseeable future. So it's been a good run. It's been a good run.
Well, Nico, we don't want you to stop either. So we want you to keep going and going and going. So we really appreciate your time here. And we will take all that you just mentioned and put that in the show notes, make it clickable for everybody so that they can learn more about WCS and maybe reach out to you as well. So thank you again for your time today, Nico. We really do appreciate it. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.